All right, today we're going to talk about the Sweep Mesh tool, which is a really helpful tool for creating things like wires and vines or toothpaste. It's helpful for a wide variety of things. It could also see it working for making like a theme park slide. And it's just a helpful tool that's a new feature in my as of 2021 here. So um, on some of the computers in the lab currently, at the recording of this video, are set to Maya 2020, and this feature won't be on there. So just keep that in mind for this tutorial. So the computer needs to be Maya 2021 or newer to have this function. So the way this tool works is we're going to start by going to Create and then Curve Tools, and then we have our 6 curve tools right here. And so it's Create Curve Tools, and I'm just going to press this double dotted line here to break out that menu. And all 6 of these do the same thing. It just kind of draws a line for you, so you can kind of choose which way works best for you. I usually go back and forth between the CV curve tool and the Bezier curve tool, and just depending on my mood and what I'm trying to draw, kind of go between those two. So to draw a curve tool, just to kind of recap on this, there's a pretty in-depth tutorial on the curve tool for the tutorial showing how to make a wine glass that'll be up on the D2L if you want to look for that. But I'll kind of recap it quickly here. But there's a more in-depth one up earlier in this class. So I'm going to use the CV curve tool, which tends to be the simplest one. So I'll click it, and you'll see this little icon even show up there. And if I draw it in my perspective mode, it's going to draw in 2D on that grid, which is fine. So for this example, I'm just going to draw something out random. Just give it a little curve. You see it stays on that grid. And so I'll press return when I'm ready to draw in the line, and it'll turn green once you press return. And from here, you can right click and you'll get this breakout menu. And if you go to control vertex on the left, these purple dots will show up. And these purple dots, if you select them and then press W or press the move tool, you can make adjustments and kind of bring this out into 3D if you'd like. Or you can adjust the line from the top view just using the blue and red arrows. And so again, I'm just going to draw this out. Doesn't have to be any specific way. I'm just going to give this a little bit of dimension here. Nothing exact. And so again, that's the control vertex. And in order to move these vertex, remember you have to press the W tool. If you just grab a vertex and it looks like that and you try to drag it around, it won't work. It's got to be in the move function right here. So once I'm done with that, I'll right click and go to objects mode. Just click off of it and then select the whole thing. And using Sweep Mesh is pretty straightforward. So I could have drawn this curve using any of these tools here under the curve tool and just draw it out. And then when you're ready to do the Sweep Mesh, kind of make this three-dimensional, you go to create and then Sweep Mesh right here. So I'll leave that up just for a second. So it's create and then Sweep Mesh. Click on that. And you can see here it automatically makes a tube. And it's a hollowed out tube, but it draws it out automatically here. And then on the right, where the modeling toolkit usually is, or the attribute editor, we'll have the Sweep Mesh Creator window show up. If you click off of the mesh and that window goes away, in order to find it again, if you just click on the object, you see how it kind of disappeared when I clicked off of it. So if you click on the object, and then under the attribute editor, look for the Sweep Mesh Creator tab. So just kind of, you might have to navigate through these tabs a little bit, but you're looking for the Sweep Mesh Creator tab. So that's how you kind of return back to this menu. This menu is laid out in a pretty straightforward way, and honestly, the best way to kind of get used to it is just to get in there and mess around with it. But so with the curve tool, I press sweep mesh, and we got this. And we have this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 basic options for how this tube can look. So this is kind of the first section here. So the first one is called poly, and it essentially makes a circular tube right here. If I do the side slider up, you can increase the resolution of the tube. There's also under this, there's the circle, which is the default. You can also change it to star. So if you want a tube that's kind of shaped like a star, that button's right there. And so that's the basic version of this. You can see here I press the cap button right there, and so if I turn on the cap button, it'll just kind of give it a cap right there. There's also another way to add that later. That's pretty easy that I'll show. So kind of moving left to right through these. Next up we have the rectangular tab. Very similar. It kind of starts us off with a rectangular tube. And the way you can adjust this rectangular tube, there's a lot of adjustments we can make in here. And the way these work, these bottom three work a lot like using the bevel tool. So you see here, the corner radius is takes the size of the bevel and increases it. Corner segments is the number of divisions within that bevel. And then corner depth at 1 is the standard bevel, which kind of goes around like that. If I set it to 0, there'll be a straight line. And then if I set it to -1, it'll be an inverted bevel right there. And so one thing I want to kind of jump ahead to is on my sweep mesh here, the how do I say this? The resolution's okay, kind of in terms of the segments going along the length of the tube here. But for some of you, when it kind of came out, it might have come out looking a little wonky or low resolution in terms of these edges kind of going along this way. And so fixing that's really easy. It's just if we go down, and I'm gonna come back to this section, but I just want to skip ahead here down to here we are. So it's interpolation, and again I'm gonna go over this section, and we'll kind of move down through what these different tabs mean. But if you skip down to interpolation, if there's just this precision slider right here, and if you just crank it up, that'll give you plenty of resolution kind of going that way. Or if you need less resolution, you can bring the slider down. Additionally, you can press optimize right here, and Maya will kind of create the amount of subdivisions it thinks, the minimum amount of subdivisions it thinks you need for the shape that you made, the curve that you made. And this can be really helpful, particularly if you're doing something like a standard wire or something like that, where you want to kind of keep your resolution as low as possible without having to get too far into the weeds. One thing, the only issue with this at all is if you want to extrude a pattern out of this. So let me just take this resolution down a little bit. So just imagining if you wanted to do something, let me do it. There we go. You know, it would take a while to get all the selections in there. I could probably do select similar. Let's just see if this works. Probably won't. Nope. So let's just say you wanted to kind of do something like this, where you selected a group of faces, and just imagine this is going all along the tube. And then Press extrude. And then pull it out like that. See how there's like a little pattern going along here? So when you press optimize, it kind of takes away the ability to do that, because just by default, using the resolution slider, oops, these are all evenly laid out, but then when you press optimize, it's doing a good job of what it's trying to do, but it makes these edges uneven here. So let me just kind of go back to the attribute editor, look back for the sweep mesh creator. So when I press, so I'm back in this menu again under sweep mesh creator. When I press optimize, you see those edges just kind of get uneven again. So extruding out an interesting pattern or something like that is no longer possible with that selected there. So moving back up to the top, so that's the resolution slider. And we've kind of gone over the poly and the rectangle. The line just creates a plain shape like this. One thing to keep in mind here is this can be a good way to work if you want like a rainbow road situation, like a floating, let's just imagine like a floating road or something like that. And if you want to give it a little bit of dimension, if you just right click and go to face mode, so right click and face right there, and selects the whole thing. And if I press extrude, just have to be careful to do the right arrow. I believe this will be the blue arrow. And just drag it up. You get that shape right there. So that's the plane option right there, which can be very useful. Next we have the arc section, which kind of looks like a water slide a little bit. And so on this one, you can take the segments and kind of add a resolution to it like that. You can also, with the angle, you can kind of change how much of a 360-degree shape it's making. So if you drag it up to 360, it'll make a full tube. By default, it's at 180. Or you can kind of make it a little less if you want it to be shallow. And I'm just going to bring it back to 180. And similar to the line, if I right click and go to faces here, select all the faces, and press extrude, I'm going to need to look for the right arrow to use. You just kind of have to feel out which arrow is going to get the best result. So again, this was the blue arrow that worked for me. I go back to object mode, and I have myself, you know, a little water slide here. And it's the model looks black right now because I kind of extruded it from the wrong side. But if I just go to mesh display in reverse at the top here, and this works if any part of your model ever looks black instead of gray here. If you get a mesh display in reverse with the make sure that only the black faces are selected. On this one, all the polygons were black there, so I could just select the whole thing and do it. But if you have a model where some of the faces are gray and some are black, just select the ones that are black and then go up to mesh display and then reverse, and it'll kind of reverse the face and kind of flip it inside out and fix that situation for you. So let me just undo this to kind of get back to where I was before. So have the wave function, kind of self-explanatory, similar concept. It's just starting you off with a wave. You can add segments to it. You can change the offset right here. These are animatable too. All these sliders in here. So that's just something to keep in mind for the future. So could be helpful for like motion design purposes and things like that. Amplitude, you can get it subtle or strong. So that's the wave right there. And let me come back to custom. Custom something I'll go over here in just a minute, but I just want to kind of stay within the basics of this thing. Custom's not that complicated. It's just a slightly different concept here. And I kind of want to just show this whole menu right here before we get into it. And there's not too much to this menu. It's pretty straightforward, pretty intuitive, just as you kind of mess around with it. So interpolation is the resolution, right there. So that's kind of the bottom. Let me move from the bottom to the top here. So you know what, never mind. Sorry, I'm fumbling here. So looking at the top, I made this back into a poly shape, and then underneath that there's this tab. This is distribution, and under distribution there's this little check mark box and nothing else. So I'm just going to make this a little low res, so just to make sure my computer doesn't crash here. Same here. So distribution, if I click it, and I might need to change my transformation tab. Oh no, that's okay. So I click the distribution button, and you see when I click it, this whole menu shows up under here. And so what the distribution button does is it gives you a number of instances. So it kind of multiply my tube from 1 to 5 here. And I can use that slab just to give it however many instances that I want. For this case, I'll just give it 3. And so just like that, you know, I could have just created my curve, just made a few adjustments to the number of sides, and then gone down to the interpolation slider and moved up the precision. Press the distribute button, and then all of a sudden you have 3 tubes that kind of look pretty good already. But let's just say I want to mess with this some, so I can change the scale of each instance, so I can make them larger or smaller right here in terms of their width. I can rotate. You can see here the rotation doesn't change these models much because they're an even circle in shape, but this will become more useful here if you have more of like a star shape or something like that, you know, more of a customized shape. And then coverage is an interesting slider. So if I drag it all the way down to 0, you can see what it's doing there. And if I drag it up, it kind of rotates them out and brings them out into full position right there. So that just helps you adjust the positioning of the tubes a little bit there. And I'm going to jump down to the transformation tab here. So I'm going to skip over alignment and go down to the distribution. And so here, if I grab the twist slider, you see here, I was able to just twist all of my wires all at the same time right there just by doing a slider right here. And you can do just a little bit. That by default it goes up to 2 as the most, but if you just type in a number, say so I'll type in 5, you can kind of get your own customized amount here. So you know, it could go for something like 15 if I wanted to. And just going with 15, you can see I need to increase the resolution of some things here to get this working. Hopefully this doesn't crash. I'm just going to save real quick. So you can see here I got pretty greedy with the twist, and I just need a little more resolution here. So under interpolation, I'll just pull up the slider a little bit and got a nice little coil going on there. So if you're making like a spring, you know, or something like that, could maybe, I guess this would be like a double coiled spring or triple coiled spring. But, you know, there's some interesting applications for this. Under taper curve, what taper curve is this will be easier shown if I turn off the distribution. So keep in mind again, distribution is the one where it is the tab that where if you want more than one wire happening here, it's the distribution. And you can see here the twist is still on. So if you want like a slinky, you can just add some twist to it, and that'll start to kind of get you where you want to go. I'm going to take the twist back to 0. And so down here under taper curve, I can taper the curve. So you can kind of get, you know, a shape like that. And again, that was just one slider that I was doing right there under taper curve. If I can find it again. So by default, value is set to 1. And if I drag it to 0, it'll kind of come in like that. And I can change this curve with this graph up above. So if I want to reverse the side that the taper is happening, so by default, you know, it'll look like this when I have the value set at 0. But I can use this curve graph. You can see here I can make it so that it's really thick at first, like a funnel. Then it gets thin really quickly, looking at that graph. And it stays thin throughout and then just tapers off to a needle point at the end there, depending on how I draw this graph. And just drawing this graph, you can draw in custom shapes here. So you can kind of end up with something you know, a little crazier in shape there, just using the taper curve to kind of change the width throughout the model there. So taper isn't relegated to just tapering off one way or the other. You can draw something pretty complicated in here. So that's something to keep in mind. So selecting each one, I can make change the interpolation between each of these points and make them smooth. Do a spline. I think spline is typically my preferred method if I want this to be kind of smoothed out a little bit. There we go. And I'm not going to spend all day on this. I just want to give some examples there. So if we, you know, by default, these are pretty hard edges that are being made here. So if you want to round them out, you just select them point by point and change between whichever mode you want, and it'll kind of smooth out the transitions that are happening there. And so again, I got to this graph by, this is under the taper curve, and you can just click right here to kind of do the same thing, but I just press this arrow button and it gives me a larger window where I can kind of see what's going on a little bit better there. But again, there's nothing I was doing in that I couldn't do right here. So, and to X these out, you can just press on the points that we made here. So you can pretty quickly just kind of get rid of work. And work from there. So let me turn off the taper right here. And kind of moving on, that's kind of most of what there is to it. I find that the distribution tab is just a really fun tab for me, just if I want like a coil or a bundle of wires. Just that's one that I use a whole lot. But let's just say that we don't want a tube and you want like a customized shape here. So I'm going to delete that. And so I deleted the mesh and I still have the curve here. Oh, before I show the custom shape, just real quick, sorry, I'm all over the place today. So before I talk about the customize shape, so this button right here, that's at the top of the sweep mesh creator, one thing that's really cool about this that I really like is, So in my outliner, I'm selecting the curve there, and then I right clicked and went to control vertex. And you see how the mesh is extruded onto the curve, but I can still adjust the curve while the mesh is swept there, which is just super helpful, you know, because if you just imagine you have like a complicated wire and you're trying to place it in your scene, you know, you can draw the curve and try to get it right, but then sweep your mesh. And if you see that you want to change the positioning of it, you know, once you start rendering and stuff like that, you still have access to adjust the shape of this thing. So just super helpful function right there. So with that sidebar aside, I'm gonna keep my curve, but I'm gonna delete my sweep mesh right here. So I have my curve there still, but I deleted my mesh. So this is still gonna be the line in which the sweep mesh happens around, but I'm gonna show the custom button. And so what the custom button is I've been showing you have these different options between having the curve be a square or a circle or a star shape. And if you want to draw out your own custom shape, you can go to create and then curve tools and draw out a curve. And you can use control vertex and bring it out. Notice that, one thing I kind of messed up there is, and this is an important shortcut, is I didn't close off the curve just then. So be sure not to make this mistake where I'm drawing a curve and then I draw it and I don't connect it and then press return. Because when we do the sweep mesh, there will be kind of like a gap in it if we do that. And so the shortcut you want to remember here is V as in vampire. That's the same shortcut that we use in the car modeling tutorial to kind of merge to or bring two vertices and snap them to the same point. So that's the same here. So when I'm drawing out the shape, kind of my customized shape, when I'm just trying to connect this point to that last point, just hold down V and then click, and it'll snap them together there. Press return, so it creates one shape. And so the V button is the trick to closing off a shape here. And so kind of I could use control vertex and continue to kind of just customize the shape a little bit, you know, to be whatever shape I want it to be. But I'll right click and go to objects mode, and I'll just leave that shape there. So for now, we'll come back to it. So for curve 1, the first curve we created, I'll select that. I'll go up to create, sweep mesh. So again, I selected that curve, went up to in objects mode, went up to create, and then sweep mesh right there, and it brings up this menu. And now I'll press the custom button, and when I press the custom button, this the one to the right over here, this custom sweep profile will show up. And here, if I just select the shape that we made, that second shape, the kind of heart shape that I was making before, and press OK, you'll see here that the sweep mesh made, made a sweep mesh out of that shape. And it's a little thick right now. One thing you can do is I just, I selected the custom shape, and then I scaled it down to make this tube thinner. You don't have to do it that way. You can also, under the sweep mesh, if we go under transformation, so it's 1, 2, 3, the fourth tab down under the sweep mesh creator, and we change the scale here. We can kind of thin it out. I can give it more resolution. If you remember, under the interpolation slider right here, just crank that up. And yeah, so that's how you create a custom mesh right there. So one thing you can do here is you can press the cap button and cap off the tube. You'll notice here That the only problem with that, and you know, it kind of depends on your model. You know, if you're connecting a wire and it's connecting to two different points, you might not even need to press the cap button. And just kind of sometimes be on the lookout here that when you create the cap tool here, it creates what's called an n-gon. So if I select this face, press F, it's a face that has, you know, I'm not going to count all those vertices, but a face is supposed to have four sides, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's ideal. And this face has, you know, looks like 15, you know, 20 sides on it. So what I would say is if you don't need the cap, you know, just don't use it, you know, and this is considered like a clean mesh here. And if you make the cap, you can often get away with that, but if you need to bring this into another piece of software or something like that, you might need to use the modeling toolkit and the multi-cut and just kind of manually fill in this geometry here. So just using the multi-cut tool, and this is, you know, could be a bit of work depending on how much mesh you have here. Oops. Come on. And so I'm not going to do the whole thing here because that would take a minute. But oops. What I would say here is just make sure that that dot turns red when you get to each vertex. And if you draw it on the line here, that's not what we want, because we want to make four-sided faces, not five-sided faces. And so this is just the way I would go about fixing this if this needed to get imported into Mudbox or anything like that. That's usually not going to be the case. Usually you'll be fine just leaving this as a as an n-gon here. But if projects arise down the road and you need this to, you know, it's required that this is fixed up, that's the way I would go about doing is that as I would just turn on the cap and start doing the multi-cut tool. One last thing I would say here, and this will be useful down the road, is let's just imagine for a moment that this is just a model that we created and we didn't use the sweep mesh tool. Because the sweep mesh tool has this nice little button. It's just a cap button and it closes off a hole. Let's just say that you have a mesh that you've been working on that you modeled using a different, more traditional method, and you have a hole right here that you want to close out. The way to do that is if you right click and go to edge mode and select this outer edge loop here, and again I just select an edge, hold shift, double click to get the whole edge loop. And sometimes you might need to do that a couple times if depending on if, you know, something's going on and it was extruded or something like that. But just select that whole edge loop, and then under the modeling toolkit it is the bridge button right here. So if you press the bridge button, it'll close it off for you. So that's how you would do that normally when modeling, because that, you know, sometimes that close cap button isn't available to you. Also, the bridge button works if I select one edge here and then I hold shift and select another edge over there and press bridge. It'll bridge it over for you like that. And yeah, that can be a helpful tool a lot of times. So I just wanted to make sure I mentioned that just to kind of add that in. I'll bring up the bridge tool more as the class progresses.